Imagine a time when terrible events unfolded, events that we might find hard to believe we could forget. The Assyrian Genocide is one such dark chapter that reveals the fickleness of human memory. Also known as the Cell, meaning the sword, the Assyrian Genocide was part of the Ottoman Empire's ruthless campaigns during the First World War. In those years, alongside the more well-known Armenian Genocide and the tragedy of the Greeks, the Assyrians faced mass extermination. Between 1914 and 1918, the Ottoman government orchestrated racially and religiously motivated atrocities, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands of Assyrians. The struggles of the Assyrians often go unnoticed, but they are filled with stories of unimaginable brutality and remarkable resilience. Today, let's take a closer look at how the horrors of the Assyrian Genocide unfolded, the heartbreaking deception by the Ottomans, and the inspiring tales of those who stood up to defend themselves against those seeking to wipe them out. The Assyrians, a community bound by shared languages rooted in ancient Aramaic, are primarily followers of the Christian faith. However, unlike the Armenians, they've never been politically united. Instead, they exist as a loosely connected ethnic group without a designated territory. In the Ottoman Empire, where they lived, the Assyrians faced violence and persecution for many years. Before the genocide in 1895, they were victims of various violent episodes that targeted Christians across the empire. Living without a fixed territory, they encountered discrimination in laws, public life, and endured violence from Turkish authorities and Kurdish raiders. As the early 20th century unfolded, the Assyrians experienced a shift with the rise of Turkish nationalism during the First World War. The new Ottoman ruler, Talat Pasha, aimed for an ethnically Turkish empire, advocating for the exclusion or elimination of minorities. The Assyrians were viewed as a potential security threat, with concerns that they might align with Russia. This marked a significant change, ushering in a period where land seizures, forced conversions, and mob violence became disturbingly routine aspects of Assyrian life. As the conflict unfolded in October 1914, Talat Pasha, the Ottoman leader, made a decree that changed the lives of the Assyrians. He ordered their deportation and expulsion from border areas with Russia and Iran, citing concerns about their susceptibility to foreign influence. These deportations, however, were more than just moving people. They were a deliberate attempt to dismantle the Assyrian culture, language, and social fabric. The plan involved breaking up communities and isolating Assyrians in more manageable locations. In these new settlements, no more than 20 Assyrians were allowed to live together, and the authorities made it clear that they should not return to their homelands. Ottoman forces began rounding up villages, often without explaining to the Assyrians what was happening. Many Assyrians found themselves on the infamous death marches, similar to their Armenian counterparts. These were grueling journeys through harsh terrain where exhaustion, starvation, dehydration, and massacres claimed the lives of thousands. If you want to know more about the death marches, you can check out our video on the Armenian Genocide. Faced with this new wave of persecution, some Assyrians sought refuge across the border in Iran. However, even there, safety was elusive, as Ottoman forces violated Iranian territory to hunt down fleeing Assyrians along the border. The Assyrians were caught in a tragic web of displacement, suffering, and the brutal impact of war. In response to the hardships faced by the Assyrians, Russia took a stand, offering arms and support to both Assyrians and Armenians. The idea was for them to fight alongside Russian soldiers during the campaigns in the region. Later that same year, Russian forces successfully captured several Assyrian towns from the Ottomans in November. However, the joy was short-lived as Ottoman forces launched a counterattack, recapturing the towns and taking revenge on the residents. At least 12 villages were completely wiped out by the returning Ottoman forces, regardless of whether the villagers had personally collaborated with the Russians. In April 1915, a fresh Ottoman army entered Aban, but Russian forces, aided by desperate Armenian and Syrian refugees, managed to repel them. The retreating Ottoman forces, furious about their defeat, blamed all Assyrians and Armenians, leading to massacres in Assyrian villages. Commander Hel Bey went to the extreme, ordering the execution of every Assyrian and Armenian soldier in his army. Meanwhile, Ottoman authorities authorized even harsher crackdowns on both communities. In one province, the governor issued a chilling three-word directive, Yak vor alor, which meant burn, demolish, kill. One survivor of these brutal massacres, Judah Abova, shared her harrowing testimony years later. Her husband, the headman of a small Assyrian village called Ada, faced unimaginable horrors when Ottoman forces arrived. They burned down her house and took her husband and sons to the village square, where they were mercilessly beaten. The captors demanded they convert to Islam, and when they refused, Judah had to watch in agony as the soldiers executed her children one by one. Desperate to protect her husband, she threw herself over him, but the soldiers callously kicked her away and shot him. The brutality of these events reflects the tragic toll on innocent lives during this dark period. In the Hakar Mountains and around Lake Ura in Van Province, where Assyrian tribesmen held control over many villages, intense violence unfolded. Similar to other places, the scattered Assyrian villages faced merciless attacks, leaving only a handful of survivors who carried tales of unimaginable cruelty. In the village of Arkai on the shores of Lake Oria, a horrifying incident took place. Terrified women trying to escape the soldiers ran into the water. When they refused to come back out, the Ottomans shot them, leaving their lifeless bodies floating in the lake. The brutality extended across the Hakar Mountains and surrounding areas, where the Assyrians endured unspeakable atrocities. Van Province witnessed simultaneous horrors during the Assyrian and Armenian genocides. One particularly egregious episode unfolded in the town of Hafdavan in the spring of 1915. Governor Jovdet Bey issued a directive, summoning all local Christian men under the false pretense of distributing food. Little did they know this gathering would lead to a tragedy that would stain the pages of history with its brutality. Instead of providing the promised food, the men gathered were met with arrest and execution. In the midst of war, the Ottomans, faced with the need to conserve ammunition, opted for a chillingly economical approach. Jev's troops, instead of using bullets, resorted to beating the prisoners to death with farming tools, equipment, and pickaxes. The brutality reached a point where concealing these horrifying events from the world became impossible. Western media played a crucial role in disseminating the harrowing accounts of massacres, while the Iranian government expressed its disgust at the violation and merciless killing of Christians throughout the Ottoman Empire. A distraught Russian consul, who had personally visited some of the massacre sites, detailed in his report the complete ruin and devastation he found in 20 villages. Churches, schools, and libraries were reduced to mere walls, and the villages were filled with the corpses of the unfortunate victims. Even the Ottoman High Command, despite officially blaming the violence in Van Province on Jev's supposedly out-of-control troops, was shocked by the brutality. However, Jev himself faced no punishment, and his men proudly embraced their new nickname, the Butcher Battalion. This grim chapter stands as a testament to the horrors endured during those tumultuous times. In the face of the dire situation, the Assyrians found themselves with only three options: submit, flee, or fight. Those who chose submission were met with almost certain death or deportation. For those attempting to escape, their chances often depended on the efforts of those who opted to fight. The battleground for resistance unfolded in the Hakkari Mountains, led by the Catholicos Patriarch of the Church of the East, Monsieur Shimun. In 1914, Shimun had already sought aid from the Russians through negotiations. Earlier, he had even written to Jvet Bey, pleading for an end to the persecutions. When these efforts failed, and with no pre-existing Assyrian military or political organizations, the church leader emerged as a symbolic figurehead of Assyrian resistance. Thousands of Assyrians in the Hakkari Mountains took up arms, rallying together to oppose those who sought to carry out their genocide. In the absence of organized structures, the Assyrians courageously stood united under the guidance of their spiritual leader, determined to defend their existence against the looming threat. In April 1915, Cevdet Bey intensified his brutal campaign by raining artillery shells on every Assyrian village he could locate. Anyone of Assyrian descent, whether a fighter or not, faced severe punishment. The Ottomans went to great lengths, even tracking down Moor Shimon's brother in Constantinople. In a chilling letter to Shimon, the Ottomans presented a choice: either instruct every Assyrian to surrender their weapons or face the execution of his brother. In response, Shimon, unwavering in his commitment to his people, wrote, "My people are my family. They are many, and my brother is just one. Let him give his life for his nation." Despite the Assyrians' defiant spirit, the Ottomans kept their word, carrying out the execution as a renewed assault unfolded. The Assyrians found themselves caught in a relentless storm of violence, facing not only physical assaults, but also heart-wrenching decisions that tested their resolve. By June 1915, the escalating violence forced the Assyrians to retreat further into the mountains. Seeking help, Shimon reached out to his Russian allies, but unfortunately, the anticipated aid never arrived. Faced with dwindling options, the surviving Assyrians in Ada province had no choice but to abandon their homes. In a desperate attempt to escape the relentless pursuit of the Ottomans, they embarked on a perilous journey into Russia, navigating treacherous mountain terrain. The escape was fraught with danger, and tragically, thousands lost their lives in the process. However, Shimon, along with approximately 30,000 Assyrian refugees, managed to successfully reach the safety of Russian territory. Among the provinces ravaged by some of the worst violence was Deportations. Commanded by Mohammed Resid Bey, Resid was a ruthless perpetrator, known for his eagerness in committing murder. His name became synonymous with fear and terror as he played a significant role in the atrocities of the Assyrian and Armenian genocides. The survivors' journey was marked not only by physical challenges, but also by the haunting spectre of violence that continued to shadow them. To justify his persecution of Christians, Resid accused them of harboring military deserters and hiding weapons. His forces conducted sweeping raids on Christian homes and churches, forcefully dragging those accused of dissent away to prison. Christians were ordered to surrender their weapons, and when they complied, Resid cunningly used these very weapons as supposed evidence of a threat, providing justification for further persecution. Within a mere 2 months of arriving in Deportations, Resid had over 1,600 Christians imprisoned. His actions reflected a complete disregard for morality or decency. On May 25, 1915, he conveyed a twisted sense of mercy, informing hundreds of imprisoned Christians that they would be spared execution and instead deported to Marseille until the end of the war. The prisoners, perhaps out of desperation, seemingly agreed. A week later, still in chains, the Christians sang as they were marched through the streets to boats waiting to transport them away. Before boarding, Resid's soldiers confiscated their possessions, promising they'd be returned upon reaching Mosul. However, this promise proved empty, as the Christians were never destined for Mosul. The twisted manipulation and broken promises marked yet another tragic chapter in the plight of these persecuted communities. Resid's troops deceitfully transported the imprisoned Christians down the river to the valley of Ban, where they met a tragic end. Every single one was ruthlessly killed. Adding to the horror, Resid's authorities callously wrote letters to the families of the prisoners, falsely claiming that they had safely reached Mosul. Meanwhile, hundreds more men suffered the same fate through massacres. The women and children left behind faced an equally grim destiny. Many found themselves on the infamous death marches, where daily life included sexual violence and arbitrary executions. Tragically, reaching their supposed destinations became an unattainable hope for many. A German diplomat, witnessing the survivors, described their misery as indescribable, with clothes falling from their bodies and women and children succumbing to hunger. Resid took a more direct and brutal approach, organizing volunteer militias to act as death squads across his province. These squads exterminated entire towns and villages at once, with tens of thousands killed monthly and thousands perishing on a single day during large-scale town targeting. Resid's actions went beyond the extreme, even by Ottoman standards. Recognizing the severity of the situation, on July 12, 1915, Talat Pasha himself wrote to Resid, demanding that he limit his killings to Armenians and spare the Assyrians, at least for the time being. Ignoring Talat Pasha's directive, Resid continued his ruthless campaign. Less than a week later, his forces committed another atrocity, killing 7,000 people in Midyat. When Resid's death squads entered the village, the residents dared to defend themselves, shooting back in a desperate act of resistance. Historians estimate that under Resid's command, up to 200,000 Christians were killed in Deportations, with at least 60,000 belonging to the Assyrian Orthodox Christian denomination and the remainder from other Assyrian, Armenian and Greek denominations. Amidst the overwhelming suffering, the Assyrians managed to demonstrate moments of remarkable resistance. In the Tabdan region of Turkey, two instances stand out where Assyrians successfully repelled their attackers. The first occurred in the town of Anvardo in July 1915, where refugees had sought sanctuary to escape attacks by Ottoman forces earlier in the year. The ancient walls of the village became an unexpected source of defense as the community rallied to protect themselves. Organizing a militia, the Assyrians held off a much larger force of Kurdish raiders and Ottoman troops for nearly 2 months. Armed with little more than bolt-action rifles and fueled by determination, they resisted the invaders. Their tenacious defense compelled the Ottomans to come to the negotiating table. However, when the Assyrians stood firm in their refusal to lay down their weapons, the Ottomans eventually withdrew and never returned. A similar tale of successful resistance unfolded in the town of Adza between August and November 1915. Barely 1,000 poorly armed Assyrian militia soldiers, self-dubbed the Jesus Fidi, defended the town against a formidable coalition of Ottoman and Kurdish soldiers. Despite their limited resources, they mounted a spirited defense that forced the Ottoman military to redirect troops from other areas to support the assault on this small town. Faced with the possibility of calling on their German allies for help, the Ottomans hesitated. The Germans, skeptical about the town being a rebel base and uneasy about reports of widespread anti-Christian atrocities, chose not to intervene. The resilience of these Assyrian communities stands out as moments of remarkable defiance against overwhelming odds. In early November, a reinforced Ottoman force launched a fierce attack on the village. Despite their renewed strength, the Ottomans were repelled by the resilient Assyrian defenders. A week later, the Assyrian fighters daringly slipped out of the town and launched a counterattack on the Ottoman positions. In a bold move, they targeted officers, seized modern military equipment, and then stealthily returned to Adza. The Ottomans, humiliated and with hundreds of their soldiers dead, had no choice but to retreat. Talat Pasha, recognizing the formidable resistance, issued the order to leave the Assyrians where they were. Thanks in large part to the bravery of these two towns, the Ottomans never fully carried out their genocide in the Tabdan region. Today, it remains one of the few Christian-majority regions in Turkey. The determined defense of Adza and Anvardo stands as a testament to the strength and resilience of these Assyrian communities in the face of overwhelming challenges. The Assyrian genocide did not conclude with a singular moment. Instead, it unfolded over time. By late 1915, with thousands deported and the provinces of Deportations almost entirely purged of Assyrians, the devastating impact was overwhelmingly apparent. The genocide was largely completed by this point. For those who hadn't faced death or deportation, fleeing became the only option, or they were among the tiny few able to resist the Ottomans from their fortified villages. Tragically, even after 1915, Assyrians were still being killed. In 1918, Shimun, a prominent figure, fell victim to an assassin only months before the collapse of the Ottoman government. However, the majority of the genocide's victims had already suffered by the end of the First World War and the fall of Talat Pasha's government. Only then could Assyrians begin to reflect on the immense hardships they had endured. As with all genocides, determining the exact death toll remains a subject of debate. In Deportations, estimates suggest that as many as 200,000 Christians lost their lives, with at least 60,000 belonging to the Assyrian community. The toll on human lives was immense, marking a dark chapter in history that would forever shape the Assyrian experience. In the Hokkar Mountains and surrounding areas, even with more Shimun's efforts to lead escapes, only a fraction of the Assyrian population was located after the war. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Assyrian representatives estimated a staggering 250,000 dead, approximately half of the known pre-war Assyrian population. More recent scholarly estimates put this number closer to 300,000. For a genocide, accountability is a rare certainty. Unfortunately, Talat Pasha and his government evaded responsibility, and only a few individuals faced charges, with even fewer experiencing convictions. Among those charged was Mahmoud Rashid, who was arrested immediately after the Ottoman surrender but managed to escape from prison. The pursuit of justice for the atrocities suffered by the Assyrians remains an enduring challenge, highlighting the difficulties in holding perpetrators accountable for such heinous acts. In January 1919, facing charges for his role in the Assyrian Genocide, Mahmoud Rashid took his own life before the government could recapture him. For Assyrians today, the Sayfo remains a stark symbol of historical persecution. Many areas depopulated by the genocide still remain empty of Assyrians, emphasizing the lasting impact of this tragedy. Despite ongoing efforts by Assyrians worldwide to gain recognition for the atrocities committed against them, Turkey remains steadfast in denying any wrongdoing. In 2023, President Erdogan dismissed the Sayfo, asserting that it lacks legal and historical basis. Turkey, he proudly declared, has no need for history lessons from anyone. While just 4 countries, Armenia, France, Germany, and Sweden, officially recognize the genocide, the Assyrian struggle for acknowledgement continues. Without a state of their own, and being a small community in number, their quest for recognition remains a challenging one. Awareness of this often overlooked tragedy is growing, but the Assyrian people continue to face an uphill battle in their fight for historical justice. Thanks for watching the video, and if you found it informative, please like and subscribe to Time Capsule for similar content. We look forward to sharing more knowledge with you in the future. Until then, take care.